Hello everyone and welcome to another technique video on my YouTube channel. This video is very special to me because I'm using a lot of the products from my line Brutus Monroe. And you'll see that I'm going to use some embossing powders. I'm also going to use some of the brand new Brutus Monroe inks, as well as a couple of fun techniques using some Brutus Monroe stamps. So to get started with this project, what I'm going to do is I'm going to first go ahead and get some paper ready, some different cardstocks ready to actually begin the project. This is the Canson 100 and I believe 140 pound watercolor cardstock. It is my favorite. It's the cold press, and I've used it in quite a few of my videos, and I really like it to use for card bases as well as to use it for the layering pieces on the card. It's pretty inexpensive for a packet of, I believe there are I think there's 30 sheets, yes, 30 sheets in the pack, and I think it retails for around $6, so I don't really mind using it for my card bases as well if I'm making a really special card. So what I started out doing there is I cut out a 6 by 12 piece of paper and also a piece of paper that is 6 inches square to put on the front of the card, as well as a piece that is 5 inches by 5 inches square to use as my top layering piece. Now this paper comes in, it is actually 12 inches, 9 inches by 12 inches, so you can just cut it at 6 inches and then you have the card base. So I'm just pulling out my Martha Stewart tool here. You saw me just score it just down at the 6-inch mark and fold it in half so we can have a 6 by 6 inch square card. Again, as you all know, I love my square cards. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this set from Brutus Monroe. It's a new set. It's really new. It just came out very recently, a couple of days ago. And this is the Butterfly Sentiment set. And what I'm doing is I'm just going to take each one of our butterflies here. I'm going to take the Versamark ink, and I'm actually stamping into the ink off screen there, and you'll see that I'm going to go ahead and stamp out the butterfly. Now it's going to be very difficult to see the butterfly on screen right now simply because I am using that Versamark ink. I have had some questions in the past about the Versamark ink. All it is just a watercolor ink pad, or excuse me, watermark ink pad. I always want to say watercolor. It's a watermark ink pad that is going to put a glycerin-like substance onto your page, and that is what's going to actually grasp the embossing powder that we're going to use here. So you'll see now that I'm going to take a piece of scrap paper that is folded in half, and I'm going to take the Brutus Monroe, embossing powder. This is in the gilded color, which is a gold, and I'm just going to tap off the excess after I've poured it on top of there. I kind of missed a little bit of a spot there. I think I missed a spot when stamping. I didn't stamp it down hard enough, and you'll see here that I'm trying to get that covered, and I get it covered kind of the best that I can with the stamping because it will stick wherever you stamped that Versamark pad. And once I actually took a look at it and I was getting ready to heat set it, I didn't really mind that it was a little bit worn like that. Now what I'm doing is I'm taking a brush, just a clean brush, and brushing off any excess embossing powder that has stuck to the actual card front. Now this will happen if you get your fingers have natural oils obviously in them, and whatever you're pressing down on any type of paper, those oils are going to leave residue on the paper that will stick with this embossing powder because it is a very fine embossing powder. All of the metallics from Brutus Monroe in the embossing powders that I've selected are a super fine powder, so they are going to stick to some fingerprints. And also if you get your finger in the watermark pad, that same thing may happen. So you just want to brush that off. So here what I'm doing is, again, I'm just stamping those other two butterflies. This Butterfly Sentiment set does come with 3 beautiful butterflies that you can color, you can watercolor, you can use markers, you can do it however you would like. I just decided that I wanted to do the embossing powder on this one simply because I'm going to be doing some watercoloring with the Brutus Monroe inks, and I wanted to be able to kind of lock that in to the raised embossed surface. So as you can see here, you actually can't really see it that well, but I do remember as I was making this card that there's a lot because I accidentally put my thumbs into a little bit of the Versamark ink whenever I was inking it up, so it did stick to all of those places. Again, super simple. Just take your dry brush and go ahead and just kind of smush off, or not smush, but brush off, excuse me, all of the powder that has been left behind. Super simple, could not be easier. So now what you're going to see me do next here is, after I get everything brushed off and I make sure that it's exactly how I want it to look, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to take my heat gun and I am going to actually start heat setting all of the butterflies. And you can see that, again, with the Brutus Monroe embossing powder, it is almost like a powdered foil with the metallics. It is very, very vibrant, and you can see that here as I'm kind of moving the card base, or the card top level, a little bit here. Now what I'm going to do here is I'm going to take the Brutus Monroe ink in Oz, the Oz shade, and I'm doing a technique here where I'm literally just pouncing on the bottom of the card and I'm dragging. This is one of my favorite techniques with the Brutus Monroe chalk inks, simply because these inks are really going to act also as a paint whenever you are putting them across a card or a piece of paper. So as you'll see here, I'm just very haphazardly doing it. I wanted it to look like it was almost just a paint drag across the bottom. And as you can see, you get extremely great coverage with the Brutus Monroe chalk inks, and as you can see here, it almost looks like a paint, like I mentioned before. Now what I'm doing is I'm just doing a quick little dry on it. All of the Brutus Monroe inks, once they are dry on any surface, are permanent. So I wanted to give it a little bit of assistance with drying here, so that whenever we move on to the next step, we can do that. This is the Brutus Monroe ink palette that you will be receiving with the ink pads that are purchased already. And I'm just taking a little bit of that Oz ink, and I am going to go ahead and smush it onto our Brutus Monroe ink palette, and I'm going to spritz it with a little bit of water. Now, here you're going to see that I'm going to take my brush, and with the Brutus Monroe chalk inks, you really want to move around that pigment. The reason being is, since it is a chalk ink, again, it's going to act almost like a paint. So it's going to be a little bit thicker than watercolor, but I really, really like that, simply because it's more like a paint that you're putting on there, a translucent paint. And that just works so wonderfully for me, because I wanted colors, obviously, that whenever you're watercoloring with them, they're going to be a little bit more highly pigmented, so you're not going to get a color that is really, really muted whenever it's dry. And also, I wanted to be able to have something that will be permanent once you actually finish with the watercoloring. So what that means is, once these watercolors are dry, you can do whatever you want over top of them. So you'll see a video coming up where I actually do a background with the watercoloring technique with my inks, and you can do whatever you want over top. You can actually use some glaze, you can use anything over top of it, and you will not have any type of cross-contamination with it, which was very important to me, because I really wanted a watercolor that would become permanent, because I have never seen that before. So it was important to me to have that kind of a unique property with my inks. So as you can see there, I'm just kind of smushing around, again, the ink. I'm using now the jack-o'-lantern color, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to, again, spritz, and I am going to pick up that ink, and I'm just going to move it around on the butterflies. Whenever I was creating this card in my mind, I thought of the old kind of, whenever you're in science class or you're in a museum and you see those beautiful, beautiful butterflies that have been preserved in a case or in a frame, and sometimes they are, again, whenever they're older, their wings may not be as pristine as they at one time were. So I wanted to have it didn't matter to me that I was a little bit out of the lines and, kind of haphazardly painting this, because I wanted it to have kind of that rustic, older feel to it. So again, I'm just putting that watercolor of the ink pad into those areas, and the nice thing about using an embossing powder is that, again, you're going to have a situation where it's going to get stuck in those areas. One other quick thing that I want to mention as I'm going ahead and drying this is, on that ink, the Brutus Monroe ink palette, you saw there that it was kind of sticking on there. That's fine. Once that's completely dry on that non-porous surface, you will be able to just reuse it and reuse it, and it's not going to cross-contaminate, because it will dry permanently. Now what I'm doing here is I'm taking the U sentiment from this set. This set actually comes with a U sentiment, and it comes with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 different tiny sentiments that you can actually put within the U, that works with the U. So right here I'm showing you that it's something that's really important is I stamped over top of that ink with the Versamark to show you how you can obviously stamp over top of the Brutus Monroe inks, and you can see that it was very permanent. There was no ink that came off onto the actual ink or the actual, excuse me, stamp, which again is a very unique property, because if it were if you were just painting with watercolors and you know, a regular watercolor palette, and you would stamp that down, some of that watercolor would lift up, and that's not how the properties of my inks are. So now you can go ahead and you can emboss over top of that. We're putting a little bit of the gold gilded embossing powder on top of the ink, and this was very exciting for me because this is the first time I've actually tried embossing over top of the inks. And you'll see here after it's dry that you get a very vibrant, very metallic finish over top of that ink, because again, it almost acts like a paint. So now what I'm doing is I'm going to take the sentiment that says "Are loved," so it's you and then "Are loved" will be below it, and I'm going to also go ahead and emboss that as well. So I'm just going to brush, or excuse me, sprinkle that embossing powder over top, and I'm going to just kind of tap it off there, and I will of course put that extra embossing powder back into the jar. And you'll see here that once I heat set it, you can't really see it now, but once I heat set it, it will appear, and it is extremely detailed. In the photographs that you'll see on Facebook that I've posted, as well as the photographs at the beginning of this video, you can see that because it is formulated as a fine detailed powder, that you will be able to get these tiny little words that are on this set to show up very, very well. So now again, I'm just taking the Brutus Monroe Jack-o'-lantern ink, because I wanted to pull some of that orange that I have on the card into our actual backer paper, and I wanted it to match exactly, so I figured why not just use the ink. So as you'll see here, again with this ink, you are going to get a very, very vibrant and very full coverage when you're using it in this way. Again, simply because the inks are very, very robust, and they are very, very I guess almost paint-like, and it's fun because again, they're permanent, they act as a paint, they have very good coverage, and you can watercolor with them. So they're very versatile, and you can do a lot of things with them, and I've been having a lot of fun with them. So now what I did is, again, I just kind of heat set that really quickly so that I could make sure that it was kind of dry and I wasn't going to smear it. And you can see that technique kind of gave us a really neat texture with the watercolor paper. And now I'm just going ahead and using my ATG gun to go around the top layer of the card. I put that piece of scrap paper down there because whenever I was inking, I wanted to make sure that my little foam mat there that I have underneath that I use for stamping didn't pick up any of the ink, and then thus in turn, whenever I would put down my paper, it would pull up some of the ink that was down on that mat. And I just looked at the back of that and there was no transfer, which I was very happy about. So now I'm just going to place that on my 6x6 backer, and you can see here that the orange, right now it's much brighter than it will set up, and you can see of course in the finished card at the beginning of this video and in the photographs on Facebook that it is a much deeper, much more muted color. Once it dries, it's much earthier. So you see it there and it's very bright, but it will tone down to match, of course, the orange in the butterflies that I watercolored. So now I just put some ATG on the front of that card, and now I'm going to go ahead and place that on the front, and we have a finished card that again reminds me of the butterflies that have been preserved so beautifully inside of a frame or a glass case. I thank you so much for watching, and I'll have all the links below for the products, and you have a wonderful rest of your day. Bye-bye.